I'm Jacob Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Architectural League. I just wanted to begin with a few brief words of thanks and some framing. So first of all, to the Cooper Union, to newly Acting Dean Benaranda and Mauricio Higuera, and then of course to the whole league team scattered about here, but in particular the program team, Ann Rieselbach, Zoe Fruchter, and Damasi Darby Washington. This program forms part of our current work series, which is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. And then beyond tonight, none of this would be possible without the support of Architectural League members, inspiration, audience, and collaborators for all that we do. I encourage you to join us if you haven't already, and you can find information about membership on our website. In particular, please save the early evening you've seen in the slide deck here of June 24th in your calendars, when we'll be co-hosting our annual meeting and party, this year called Drawing Together, with the Brooklyn Public Library at Grand Army Plaza. A vibrant public realm is only possible when people from different walks of life come together to dream, design, and build. Very appropriately concluding the city's Democratic primary election that day on June 24th. And I believe the library is going to be a polling place, so really tying up all the loose ends. Drawing Together will aim to do just that, bringing us closer together amidst forces that aim to drive us apart. Filled with sketching sessions guided by members of the Architectural League, tours of the BPL Central Library renovation by renovation architect Shikomori, music, dancing, refreshments. The evening is meant to remind us that building the world around us is a collective, joyful endeavor. So, in that spirit, a few brief words about tonight's program before handing it off to our moderator. As we sit here on ancestral Lenni Lenape homelands, the at times violent design, construction, and defense of society at all scales continues across the planet. Climate change, genocide, mass deportation, now entwined with levels of income and wealth inequality not seen since the likes of the Gilded Age, are hard present truths to be reckoned with and resisted by successive generations as we chart a path, as we say in the Architectural League's mission, toward a more livable and just world. In this context, we're really excited and eager to gather to discuss the importance of well-designed civic space. These large and small cultural and governmental indoor and outdoor public spaces, we're seeing the way in which various workplaces and parking lots are activated in a civic manner in Los Angeles right now, for example. So it's a wide range of spaces that we think about when we say civic space. All of these together shape how, where, and importantly, who is able to come together to look one another in the eye and to shape the systems by which we agree to live as communities. So to help us think through some of the possibilities for this broadly construed notion of civic space today, we have absolutely stellar guests. So I'm only tasked with introducing our moderator, who will then introduce our speakers. So Mimi Wang co-founded In Architects with Eric Bunge with a belief in architecture as an agent of positive change that connects people and environments in unexpected ways. An ambition to respond to changes in contemporary life while fostering social engagement guides her work across realms, and it's her incredible work on civic spaces in particular that inspired us to invite her tonight. Born in the tropics of Vietnam and trained in Amsterdam and New York City, she brings a global outlook and an obsession with greenery to the firm's design culture. Mimi teaches graduate design studios as an adjunct associate professor at Columbia University and previously taught at Yale and Harvard universities. She received her Master's of Architecture from the Harvard GSD and her Bachelor of Science in Art and Design from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Architecture Record recently recognized her with a Women in Architecture Design Leadership Award. There's much more one can say about Mimi and Architect's work, but we'll let her take the stage and give us a frame for the rest of the discussion, so I'm really happy to invite her up now. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's a great turnout. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Anne-Marie Duvall Decker and Roy Decker. Can you hear me? Yeah. Cool. The architects, educators, activists, community leaders, sometimes maintenance crew, and critical thought leaders behind the expanded practice Duvall Decker. By expanded, I mean that they wear many, many hats beyond their design practice, ensuring that what they do in their design practice is born out of community and place and continues to serve both well after. Before design, they may be helping communities strategize civic-minded development through Eldon development. And to plan for life after construction, they may be helping to plan for maintenance and care of their facilities through done management. It is all in the service of what they call architecture as public work. Sometimes they refer to it as both and, but we'll get to that. I am inspired by their incredible range and the capacity to do all of the above, or what I see from the outside as whatever it takes to work in a context with an incredibly rich culture and also a history of inequity, whatever it takes to elevate the quality of education and public health in a place that has suffered from decades of underfunded infrastructure, whatever it takes to increase property value within a sporadically depressed economy, or to transform sites with serious environmental challenges into healing landscapes. I think we could all use a great big ray of hope and some concrete action on how to move the needle towards a much more inclusive and equitable society. So please join me in welcoming Anne-Marie and Roy.
Good evening. It's an honor to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you, Jacob, Ann, and Zoe, and everyone at the Architectural League for inviting us to be part of your current work series. And finally, thank you, Mimi, for your kind, and thank you for it being short, as you mentioned earlier, introduction. When I was on Mimi's jury for the Architectural Record Award, I was telling her I was creeping on her and felt like we were just aligned. So we are admirers of your work and your perspective, and we look forward to the conversation that follows the talk. Now, Roy and I founded Duvall Decker in 1998 with a simple, hopeful, and in retrospect, necessarily naive proposition that all architecture is public work. This initially led us into publicly funded work, so we were doing K through 12 schools, state agency buildings, universities, but this interest in what is public value has remained our pursuit, no matter the project type, and even in our expanded practice, and no matter who is funding the project. In that we seek to relocate the site of the design work, to dissolve the artificial separation between subject and object, to displace ego with empathy, so that we can focus on the consequences of the work in public life. It is this belief in public value that has brought together all of the people we have been privileged to share this search with over the years, a group of talented and conscientious designers with diverse perspectives and skills, and all of them, what they share, and one of them is one of the former ones in the audience with us. We're so excited to see you, Daniel. All of them share a keen awareness of the consequences of their work in the lives of the many people it touches every day. So in our particular place in the South, we have significant challenges to overcome, as Mimi referred to. So in these maps, I want to point your attention to the two center maps at the top. The one on the left shows the population of Native and Indigenous tribes, in Mississippi prior to 1830. In 1830, the federal government moved many of these indigenous people to reservations in the West as part of the exodus, as you all know, known as the Trail of Tears. So between 1830 and 1860, the lands were distributed to wealthy plantation owners from the East. This 30-year period from 1830 to 1860, the lands were distributed to plantation owners from the East. So the map on the right with the yellow that hugs the Mississippi River there shows the percentage of slaves in the counties of Mississippi. So at that point in 1860, that map shows there were more enslaved people than whites in many counties scattered across the state. And all the maps that then follow after this really are the sort of horrible and stunning fallout of those 30 years. I mean, it's really amazing to look at this whole time frame and look at the importance of those 30 years and the fallout that really persists to this day in our consistently depressed economy with its systemic inequities and continued racial strife. So our place may seem like an outpost of incivility when viewed from afar, but these challenges and struggles have bred a resistance and an inspiration. So Frank Figures, which is up on the upper left-hand corner there, is a veteran of the civil rights movement and has been an often client for us. Right now, he's on the board of the Jackson Public Schools for the work that we're working with them now. And we're really privileged to witness him and many others continue their civil rights work as he challenges us in our work with the district to achieve what he calls One Mississippi, which is really an amazing, with all of the stories that he has to tell, that is his goal, one Mississippi, not a divided Mississippi. Others, Eudora Welty, Medgar Evers, Robert Johnson, they identify and amplify the goodness, dignity, and creativity born of struggle. Out of all of it, we believe that they create art, and they inspire us to try to do the same. And that is why really Roy and I see our ability to live and practice in Mississippi as a great privilege. The responses to Mississippi and Jackson's struggles are living and palpable inspirations to us every day in our work. We are also inspired by the natural beauty of our place. It is still largely rural in character, uncultivated in most places except only the most populated conditions, and lush with colorful landscapes and vegetation. Southern sunlight is a gift of highlights and shadows, alive on surfaces and dancing with wind and trees. It can be warm and golden at the first and last light of day, bright and crisp in the middle of the day. Our climate is also a challenging place to build. It makes us students of durability and enclosure. Storms like these bring wind-driven rains that can exceed 1 inch in an hour, and the humidity can be stifling and devastating to buildings that are not adequately sheltered and sealed.
So 25 years ago, Ann and I raised a question. If we were going to practice, if we believed in the optimism that architects are trained with, if we believed that architecture could actually have a positive impact, could generate consequences in our community that were meaningful and healthy, both environmentally and socially, we made the decision to practice where the problems are the most difficult, where the need is greatest. In this place that we found incredible need, we also found incredible hope and beauty. So 25 years ago, this proposition that all work is public and that we saw the practice as a search for public good, for public value, and we didn't really know what that meant at the time. We just knew that we were going to invest our skills, our knowledge, and our profession in the service of our community in meaningful ways. We knew that we had few resources. We knew that we were always working against the politics, the circumstances that we would face. But the belief was that if we could find success, small ones, they might serve as examples for other places around the country. It's a simple, as Ann said, it might have been a little naive, but we started forward. That proposition meant that we had to kind of examine everything we assumed, everything we'd been trained about being an architect. So we started to keep track. Actually, our first employee kept track for us at first. As we kind of began our practice, we were asking ourselves questions. We were kind of saying to ourselves these things that we were learning. We were developing the values of the firm. We were in motion, in time, designing the firm. I came back from a construction site one day, and I said something, don't know what it was, and Betsy said, "There's another one for the list." And Ann and I looked at each other and said, "What list?" Well, she was writing, as she heard us repeat these things, and we were kind of saying, "Now we need to do this," she was writing them down. That list had 6 kind of values, what later became foundations in it at the time. And so we had a Word document. We started adding to it over the years. So that list is now about 25 years old, and it now has 53 foundations. The first group were aspirational, as you can imagine. The middle group, the middle 15 years, the middle 10 years of practice were us kind of slogging it out, trying to figure out, what in the world is marketing? What does it mean not to borrow money? How do we write better contracts? And then the last 10 years, they've been more reflective about maybe how could the profession be better? So about 2 years ago, we decided it was time for a report, in a way, a report on the practice. This all from the beginning was a grand experiment with hope, naivete, and a kind of drive, a kind of will to employ our skills to do something valuable and meaningful. The report is a collection of the foundations, and there are actually 9 propositions that are kind of more overarching that kind of apply to all the work. The first group of, as I said, are kind of hopeful. The second group are pragmatic. The last group are really looking at what we could be as a profession. And then each of the foundations has a commentary that we wrote. And the commentary has all of our sources, all of our thoughts, all of our failures. My favorite example always is the one that says, "Don't borrow money." And then we had to explain in the commentary why twice we had to borrow money and how that hurt. One is wake of interest. We thought if we just do good work, people are going to find us and hire us. Well, that didn't work, So, but along the way, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about being good architects, but more than that, we learned about how to be servant leaders and teachers in our community, and what it means for an architect to think differently about practice, not as just a service provider or a problem solver, but as an activist, a leader, and a transformer of the circumstances that we need to change. So we're going to go through 5 projects tonight, kind of quickly, each highlighted by one of the foundations. And we're going to start with 2 that are kind of older, that are kind of early projects, but they really set the tone for what follows. And they kind of expose to ourselves the kind of ideas that run through all the work. And the first foundation, engagement, remember, an early one, an aspirational one. Engaging buildings entangle us in a world of difference and description. Explanation and its forces of simplification are necessarily pushed to the background. What we realized is that we live in a world of authority, and that authority is often telling us what to think, what to do, what's important, now, in a scary way, even what truth is. So this question about authority maybe is the most important thing we could talk about tonight at length, because it is the thing that we need to seize and make sure we're in control of. This is the Mississippi Library Commission building. The Mississippi Library Commission is a 60,000 square foot building. It's both a state agency service provider to libraries around the state, but it's also a library, the state's premier reference library. Prior to the funds for this building, they spent 20 years in a Bill's Dollar Store, which, if you're not from the South, is a retired bad Kmart building. Leaking, nobody had no patronage, and really was not serving the state's libraries at all. We were hired and pretty much told that, the model for this project is probably the University of Virginia, and what else would we think, But the reason we got hired is the librarians saw me give a lecture on the future of libraries and the nature of buildings being educational. They liked that. And so we entered into a conversation with the Library Commission leadership and board about what would a library of the future look like? What would a library that was actually empowering to education rather than explaining what education should be or is? And it really set us off on a path to think about the difference between inquiry and instruction. Now, we all have screens in our hands, and that is all. It's filled with instruction. What's important? What we should do? What's popular? And even again, what's truth? And we realize that the more we follow instruction, the more we acquiesce to the systems telling us what to do, the more we give up imagination, individual inquiry, the more we become consumers, and the less we seize in terms of our power to be good citizens and stewards of our community. So this led us to think about, well, what does that mean? What does it mean for architecture? And art historians are not happy with my very quick summary of art analysis here in art form. But we were reaching out. We were looking for ways to understand how form and it could teach us. And the School of Athens by Raphael, interior space to the canvas, single point perspective. All of the characters in the play are acknowledging the authority of Plato and Socrates, right? A singular demonstration of authority and power, and in fact telling everyone that views that painting how to read the world. The Cubists were interesting. They said, okay, well maybe it's a combination of witness and subject, right? And they exploded time across the surface, and you could choose, you could be a creative force with the painter. But it was the abstract expressionists who really got us charged. They said, this is just a thing, and they pushed space out into the world in front of the canvas, and witness is invited to participate in the making and the exploration of even how the phenomena of the painting is understood and how it's lived. So we looked further. We needed to look at architecture. We looked at the birth of institutions. Prior to the French Revolution, monarchs ruled by fear. If you stole a loaf of bread, they cut off your arm. So everybody would be afraid to steal bread. But after the French Revolution, we needed a new way to organize society, a new way to articulate how the systems work, and institutions were born. And institutions required a kind of form. And the Alts Museum is such a great example of how those first institutions really established that center eye of power, which characterized the identity of the institution, of the state, of the community. And then everything around it was seen in the periphery as related to, as supporting, and as the result of this power. Well, that organization has played itself out for long enough, really. I mean, the question about Jefferson expanding the identity of a new country across the land using classical architecture was really an application of that same idea. But maybe that idea has run its course. We certainly think so today. The conversation with the librarians was really a conversation about how to move from this articulation of instruction to discovery, to inquiry. And that took a lot of planning and a lot of design work and a lot of conversations, but we really moved away from the centralized power structure, the location of identity, and moved to the redistribution of power, to the discovery of space. So we called it a kind of indirect planning, a pause and move plan. There are many centers in the building, and each time you come to a moment, there's a pause, but there's horizons, inner horizons, which draw you in multiple directions, so it's always open to your choice. The other thing we realized is that what Ann talked about, this southern light, this gift of the aliveness of our environment, storms and morning light and afternoon light and seasons, we realized that if we could enliven a building, if we could bring that change to the surface of the building, to the interior, to the inner layers of the building, then maybe every time you go to work, every time you visit the library, if the building is a little different, it challenges your memory and awakens your sensibilities. Maybe in the most gentle way, it opens your senses again to look a little deeper, to look a little bit more discreetly at color, at light, and at reflection. So these two propositions, these two ideas run through the whole building. You know, each pause is introduced with a horizon, and every pause has a kind of denial of the expectation. The transparency's around the doors, and the doors are kind of heavy and metal shingled, and they stop you and introduce the pause. The interior has multiple directions. The library is off to the left, off screen. There's a screen porch suspended outdoors over the lobby. And then you look down the corridor and you're moving in the building, and it's getting brighter and brighter as you move forward. Exactly what you wouldn't think would happen. The layers of the space, I talked about the liminality, the edges. We treated everything like a porch inside the building, a porch outside the building. Again, enlivening those edges and drawing everyone really to the edges rather than the center. So this whole indirection was a building of a remaking of that classical Beaux-Arts plan into something different. This is the porch along the edge of the reading room and the reading room. And on the right, up above, is a loft, which is screened, which has the private reading spaces up there. So these layers of space, porches upon porches, edges upon edges, and in a way, no center. The story carries on outside, and maybe the only real center is actually the lawn on the outside of the building, which is used as programming year-round.
Foundation 28, Origins. So another privilege of living in Mississippi is that the cues to history and culture embedded in architecture and in the built environment have not been obliterated by economic progress because of our consistently depressed economy. So architecture in the service of capitalism, as you know, one of my favorite articles from Michael Kimmelman talks about the ghost signs that happen here in New York City. It's amazing for me to think that history gets revealed and then immediately gets obliterated. Where in Mississippi, it's much slower. And we have a chance really to still see that history, be part of that history. I can remember when I was doing research for the Medgar Evers house renovation, I went to Archives and History to review the materials about his life, and I realized that I had bought our Christmas tree in the Quonset huts that served as the prisons for the protesters in the movement. And that's when I realized what a privilege it was that these built environment things were still cues to the past for us. And that helps us to see both the heroic past that we like to remember, as well as the tragic sort of past that we would like to forget, those injustices that happen. So both those injustices and that heroism that is part of our history are palpable and alive on the campus green of Tougaloo College, which is a historically black college in Jackson, Mississippi. After the land was taken from its native inhabitants in that same time frame, John Bodie founded a plantation, of course operated by enslaved individuals. And by all accounts, Bodie was cruel to both his family and his slaves. Within a couple of years of starting the foundation, he lost his wife, left him, and the plantation failed. So the American Missionary Association, an organization with a mission to educate freed slaves and other underserved groups, took over the land and founded Tougaloo College, one of the many schools it founded to make education accessible to those who had been denied it. Later, Tougaloo became the heart of the civil rights movement in central Mississippi. Many a march and protest were planned in the relative sanctuary that was Tougaloo's campus, just far enough north from Jackson and surrounded by forests that it really was a sanctuary away from the danger after the protest. One of the instigators of the movement was Ernst Berinsky. He's pictured with this stern look in the upper right-hand corner. He was a German Jewish immigrant who made Tougaloo his home and conducted social science seminars and brought civil rights leaders from all over the country to Tougaloo to talk with students and to teach them about nonviolent protests. Fannie Lou Hamer, Andrew Young, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, all of these people spoke in either Beard Hall, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, or Woodworth Chapel, which both of these are on that campus green at Tougaloo. So they met with Tougaloo students in these seminars, and they taught them history and social science, and they also brought them into the nonviolent protests of the movement. So Bodie's Mansion is this number one just off the side of the map there. It still stands and in fact has been renovated by the college, restored by the college. So their motto is Tougaloo, where history meets the future, and they really mean it. They live the history, they keep it there, and then they go forward from that point. Just south of the mansion was Beard Hall, which is the site of the Benny G. Thompson Academic and Civil Rights Center, which we were charged with building just south of the mansion. So for us, this was difficult, right? We were charged. Beard Hall had already been lost to the campus, but it was the sort of hallowed ground, and it had a history that we felt like needed to be brought forward in the building. So back to that campus green and the Bodie Mansion. It really claims its authority. As Roy said, we're asking ourselves, what is authority in form, and how is another way to look at that? It's a classic example of claiming authority, taking the highest point of the land, being totally symmetrical, having tall proportions, tall intimidating proportions, even having a tower centered that always had everybody on the plantation feeling surveyed by the landowner. And its porch would have been, of course, inaccessible to anyone but the family and its guest. So the Benny G. Thompson Center, which you see here to the left with the mansion beyond, in contrast to the mansion, shifts authority to individuals, again, through its built form. How do we do this in form? It's asymmetrical and engages the sloping landscape. There is no all-seeing tower centered upon it. There is no singular organizing center, as Roy talked about earlier. There are multiple centers accessible to all and visible to one another, and another example of this pause and move plan that Roy described with the Library Commission. The entrance is not an imposing opaque figure. It's a transparent corner slipped into the edge of the porch. Oh, that's probably me. There we go. Got to be careful.
Did you do that?
I did that. And the long shadowed porch is really an invitation to linger along that campus green. So the building was the first academic building built on the campus since 1959, which is hard to believe. So its program was really varied, from housing Tougaloo's significant African and modern art collection, which is a whole story in and of itself, how Tougaloo ended up with these collections, to a lecture hall, conference center, and flexible classroom buildings. Halls and corridors have been widened to create margins for students to claim, spaces to inhabit, even to climb upon, to study, to have discussions, and to look into and across the building, or to occupy a prospect over the campus. Another foundation, number 4, says that we should challenge the conceptual bias of our time. What we have learned from our artist Robert Irwin is that naming can short-circuit experience. So for us, this has always meant that we should avoid narrative content in the work. So if you are reading a building, you're distracted from the ability to experience it, from the ability to witness the environmental phenomena that are moving in and around it. So when President Beverly Wade Hogan asked us to incorporate the college's civil rights photography into the building because she talked about the need for her students to know the history that their parents knew or their grandparents knew, but they were no longer as connected to. We were, and this is an understatement, concerned. Trying to keep that narrative content out of architecture is something we avoided at all costs, that narrative content. So now it had to be integral to the architecture. And this narrative content is so particularly powerful, as you see in the image. So we realized that the spatial condition could never, overcome it, and we didn't want them to just be like images on the wall. So we decided we wanted to try to figure out a way to amplify that narrative content. So the device that we used was threshold, aluminum-clad pauses between each wing of the building, compressed, larger-than-life images pressing in on you from two sides. And what we hoped this did is made the historical experience present and palpable for those students. So it was a humbling experience at the opening of the building to witness John Lewis, Benny G. Thompson, veterans of the Freedom Rides, and Tougaloo alumni students who were in some of the photographs, gathering in these memory theaters, abandoning all those more spacious and comfortable spaces on each side of the thresholds to sort of live right in the middle of them. So we submitted the Benny G. Thompson Center to Porch, an Architecture of Generosity, the exhibit of the American Pavilion at this year's Biennale in Venice. And we were honored to be invited to design one of the exhibits. Our window, as the vertical exhibits were called, was designed as an analytique of the building and its place in the sanctuary that was Tougaloo College. So the bricks and the piers of the porch were handmade by everyone in our studio out of copper, like the bricks that were handmade by Tougaloo's students in the college's early days. One of the civil rights image thresholds are modeled here in the window and draws the viewer in to see, on a faceted mirrored background, hidden imagery behind the pier, as well as glimpses of oneself, to remind us that we all have work yet to do together. And the bell hooks quote, "Choosing the margin as a space of radical openness," is engraved across the base of the exhibit and is an inspiration for us for both the building and the exhibit design. So as we traveled to Venice and experienced the polarized way America and Americans can be now seen, we were proud that the American Pavilion used architecture to promote shared experience between people, no matter who they were. An example of an architecture that can teach us each to relearn the civic skills to cooperate. People from many countries sat in the dappled shade of Marlon and I.T. Blackwell's porch intervention and lingered to enjoy the gathering. The intervention can be seen as a criticism, of course, but it seems to me more importantly, a hopeful speculation expressed honestly, inspired by the places of its creators and co-commissioners, Susan Chin, who's here in the audience with us, Peter McKeith, and Rod Bigelow.
Listen but lead. Listen carefully. The client knows more about the program than you do. The consultant knows more about the systems than you do. The contractor more about construction than you do. Listen carefully to the details, the implications, and the relations. Remember, these are statements that we're making to ourselves about how to practice and how to remind ourselves what's important. Enter into the world of each discipline, but lead the process, because we know more about the whole of the process and the design than the client, consultant, or contractor. So sometimes when architects think that they are a participant of service amongst a team of specialists, they forget that they are the leader, and that actually the composing and the organizing and the efficiency by which all those systems go together and serve a larger need and a larger goal is what's most important. This proposition, this foundation was tested on this project. This is the Bedore Center Transitional Housing Project in Senatobia, Mississippi. These are 2 buildings for 5 intellectually disabled adult males each. So 2 separate buildings, 10 males. And on a campus that serves this population. And this population is very complex with all sorts of disabilities. So there are books written, and the Bedore Center actually hired a special consultant to help us come up to speed, to kind of learn all the best practices and of lessons learned on how best to design space for these individuals. Now, intellectually disabled adults can be 45 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, but their emotional, psychological age might be 10, 12, 15. So their ability to manage conflict and to be stressed, manage conflict is limited, and maybe their ability to be stressed is kind of heightened. So living together and the circumstances by which we avoid conflicts through the management of the architectural work became a really important part of the research. Now, we listened to the experts, we listened to the Bedore staff, and we produced a couple schematic designs. They were terrible failures. The residents looked at them and did like they didn't even understand, right? And so we realized we were talking to the wrong informants. We were talking to the wrong client. We needed to talk and listen to the residents themselves and let them, in their own words, explain to us what their daily life was like, what their relationships were like, what stressed them, what surprised them, what caused conflict. And it was out of that process that we began to really look more deeply at their life and the circumstances of their life together and understand that, you know, they like everybody else. There are basic needs and great and very simple ideas about living together that are important. But they also have needs of support, and when staff would need to come into their world, that needs to be managed very carefully, and the thresholds in this project became utterly important. There are certain permissions that have to be granted at each level of engagement between outsiders and the residents. So we began to get very sensitive to the whole idea of thresholds and how these populations and the support staff and the families come together in these buildings. Now, these residents are utterly possessive and territorial about their space. When they really locked into their home, it was amazing how much they loved their place and protected it and shared it. But they were also territorial and careful. So learning the reality of their lives informed us in a way that the experts and the books and the consultant, all really important information, but not really getting us to a home for these individuals. Those diagrams and those diagrams and those sections turned into plans, and we began to see the importance of the thresholds, but also the previewing of space. So it's important if one of them is stressed, they're coming back from, they work on the campus, they have relationships on the campus, they exercise. If there's one in stress and they're coming back and they don't want to engage, they need to be able to preview the space and not enter in. They also need to be able to have their privacy and all that protected. So there are subtle little relationships in the plan making, no dead ends. Like if there's a kitchen, you can't really have a dead end. If someone's at the inside and there's a problem, it can cause a fight, a terrible, and people can get hurt. By the way, we did tell these residents that we were going to photograph that day, and they themselves chose to get different color shirts. They all wanted to stand out. The houses are really very simple. There's 2 houses next to each other, the kind of public building and then the private building. And I do want to go back just for a second. And one of the things that we learned, the residents kept telling us everything is too small. They don't have enough space. They don't have enough space. They were looking at the drawings and the sections, and we had models. They don't have enough space. And we were maxed out at square footage and budget, and we're trying to manage all that at the same time. It wasn't the plan. It wasn't the floor plan. It wasn't the footprint. It wasn't that. It was the ceiling height. Most group homes are 8-foot ceilings, and that's what they'd been living in, and they felt it was oppressive, just like you and I.
The other thing to note, just quickly, Roy, if you don't mind going back to them, is These guys, they divide up the maintenance of these buildings. So they take care of the buildings. And for us, this is the most well taken care of buildings that, other than the ones we take care of, as well. So it's amazing to hear them talk about how they maintain these buildings. All of them are so proud of it.
They are. So previewing space, porches, edges, places to gather. And then another thing about the residents, we found that they really live by the cycles of the day. Sunrise, sunset, that their clock is very much part of the weather and the environmental day. So in each bedroom, we built chimneys, light chimneys, to catch the sun. So even when we had bedrooms on the west side, we poked those chimneys up to catch that morning light and bring it down into the bedrooms. Now, that turned out to cause the Bedour Center staff a little bit of stress, because the residents around the Bedour Center actually called them and said, "What in the world are you doing? You're putting fireplaces in all of those bedrooms?" And then this is a campus too that they have golf carts, and there's a garage, and they have these passages that really come into the middle of the building so that someone can come home and go directly to their private space or go into the public space. Again, the thresholds, the steps, the pauses between the living circumstance of being together and the need for privacy. This is really what we've talked about in our practice as the difference between envelopment and exposure. You know, envelopment, you're enveloped in your world and you're secure and it's contained. And then in public, we're exposed. And most of us live in circumstances where we like both of those things at the same time. These residents, not so much. They wanted distinction and clarity. So listen but lead. When we listened to the right client, we were able to lead the project to a success. And one last thing about this project, they report almost no incidents between the residents in the 2 years it's been open.
So foundation number 2, as Roy said, one of those aspirational ones, one of those early foundations, are really the one we're still striving to uphold in every project, maybe one of our most important. Art. History tells our story. Science explores how things work. Philosophy interrogates our beliefs. Art is the only human discipline that has the power to ask us who we might become and how we might be better. When we see art as a creative search for public good, it ceases to be a personal aesthetic conceit and has the power to enhance cultural and environmental quality. So this is the Cooperwood Senior Living Project. It's an affordable 80-unit assisted and memory care community sited on the southern portion of a 16-acre site in Flowood, Mississippi. It's the first phase of a master plan which includes the development of future housing, healthcare, and retail spaces situated in a walkable community that will connect to this facility. And a little bit like the Bedour Center, it's a campus that is sort of the whole world for these people. Like I think Roy mentioned, the people who come to the Bedour Center as adults, they may live the rest of their life there, and everybody works at Bedour to make sure that's a full and complete life of work and recreation and spiritual enrichment. So that's kind of similar here as well. People will come here, and it needs to be a full and complete community. So the project embraces and improves a pre-existing drainage ditch that was flowing through the center of the site. So what we had to do is mitigate these really low-quality wetlands. So we transformed them. We sort of made them into an opportunity to make a landscape pond and a natural habitat that was integrated into the development. In fact, the geese moved in just across from the bridge before any of the residents moved in. So some of the first residents watched the geese hatching a family right next to the bridge that you see there. So the residential wings run along the east and west of the water, and the community building bridges over it. The assisted units line the water running roughly north to south. so that all residents have views of either sunrise or sunset and a variety of sun conditions throughout the day. And all of them have access to water, views of water, wildlife, and the surrounding forest. The memory care wing, which you see on the left there, encircles a private, safe, shaded courtyard to the south, and the shared public facilities that bridge across the water includes a cafe, a theater, a dining room, an art studio, an exercise room, and a salon. And that's the 2 stories across there. There's also a northern and a southern porch overlooking the water, so you have both sunny and shaded options for outdoor space. So prior to starting the project, the father and son team of owners of the property had embarked on a personal search for affordable home for a family member, for an aging family member. And they were dismayed with their choices. Lower cost facilities featured impressive entries and lobbies, but beyond that, small, dark residential units, often with views overlooking parking lots. At the other end of the scale, the very expensive facilities were more beautiful and spacious, but were only available to the wealthiest residents. So Cooperwood was conceived to fill that gap, to provide assisted living community that was enlivening as well as affordable. So the owners, Roy and I, had all experienced the problem of housing our loved ones in facilities that were not designed around human dignity. Both of our parents had suffered rooms with views to parking lots. Roy's dad, an outdoorsman, this was a particular insult to not be able to see the wildlife beyond his room. And often low ceilings, these public rooms that were in the middle of the footprint of the building and no access to natural light and views beyond. So we, Roy, I, and these owners decided to rethink the senior living building typology that was common in our region. It was an intentional thing that we were doing. We realized that we needed to embrace the 2 scales of the building, the home scale of the resident rooms, and the community public scale of the shared spaces. And this is a view of that memory care wing from above. You can see it encircling that private courtyard, which allows residents to wander around in and outside, visit with their friends and their guests, but always be safe and contained. Porches and patios extend the public spaces, the living and dining areas out to the landscape. And this is a view of the entry to the memory care area. So what we did here is we utilized these faceted facades. They're really a response to both interior and exterior conditions. On the exterior, they are a musical pattern of overlapping rhythms, unified by repeating gables and brought to life in the sun and shadows. And you can see these aluminum window shades that shield each window from the southern sun. On the interior, these undulating walls break the typical oppressive 4-square institutional room that we had witnessed in other facilities. They subtly shift the views from inside the room to slightly different orientations when you go to your neighbor's room and back to your own. They vary the quality of the color and the light coming in that enters. So we kept these multiple large windows, larger than standard windows, located across the units. And a simple move that you would think would be always true to make sure that the furniture could be arranged in multiple orientations without blocking the windows, but that was not always common in the facilities that we witnessed. And we made simple moves like placing the window near an adjacent wall so that the color and the brightness of the light could easily be reflected in the room, or to allow a view when a resident's health confines them to their bed. In many ways, these residents have similar needs to the Badura residents. Everyone needs space to foster interaction with one another and with the environment. And everyone needs a slightly more private spaces to get away from the crowd or to have a private conversation. and widened margins are really important to allow someone to take a moment and slow down and enjoy the view. And as I mentioned earlier, we really took on that scale distinction and allowed all of the public spaces to be publicly scaled and to have large windows and views to the exterior. Thresholds, which we talk about a lot, are important here too. The economy of the building required that we had long double-loader corridors, so we made these sort of 4-unit porches, interior porches. They were pauses of colored gathering areas, a place where you could stop and take a rest along that long walk or visit with your neighbor. So when we were researching the special spatial environmental needs of the residents of Cooperwood, we remembered the lessons of Badur, and that understanding that we realized how universal these needs are. All of us on days we feel weak could use a threshold that allows us to preview the space before we walk into it. And all of us can appreciate legible spaces that allow us to choose whether or not we engage with others or find a spot on the margin that we can claim as our own.
I'm going to go back to Cooperwood just for 1 second to say something else about our practice. It is an expanded practice, and one of the ways we realized that we could help in our community in projects across the rural South, really, is if we could find capital to help projects become real, if we could find money for our clients, and we got really good at it. So we've gotten great at landing historic tax credits, new market tax credits, development incentives. For Cooperwood, we were able to identify a tax credit rebate, a sales tax credit rebate, which saved about $1 million on the project. As we were fighting the cost, to keep the cost low enough to make sure that the residents that they were intending to target, middle income residents, could afford the building, we had to find other money to make sure that we could keep the project in its affordable range and didn't, in fact, slip up and become something elite. Everybody wanted it to be accessible to the populations that it most needed to serve. So we that's the development consulting portion of our work. We actually find a lot of capital to make projects real or to make them better and make them more responsive and serve their needs. So, meaning is pursued, not imposed. Meaning is established first in the architecture of visceral presences. Then on top of this spatial haptic foundation, uses, stories, relations, and connections are layered. This goes back to what Ann was talking about in our lessons from Robert Irwin. If we can feel the character of space first, then in fact we are more engaged biologically, psychologically, and emotionally in the places we are. And the content, the stories lay on top of that. Then we've kind of made a space that is effective and serving our humanity in what we believe is more profound ways. Now, this project is really a demonstration of the search for meaning. And before I talk about this project, I want to call out Charles McKinney here because his father was mayor of Springdale when they built the first city hall. So Susan and Charles are very special in our front of our audience tonight on two of our projects. Now, meaning. So I got to tell you about Northwest Arkansas first. A lot of you have heard about Northwest Arkansas. You've got architecture, you've got Walmart, you've got the Walmart Foundation, and you've got all of these very important projects being done. And so we got the commission to do the Springdale Municipal Complex, and we sat down with the residents of Springdale, the administration, the current mayor, and the staff, and we said, tell us about Springdale. And this is what they told us. They said, well, if you want art and cafe life and bicycles, you go to Bentonville. If you want an education and you want a football team and you want baseball, you go to Fayetteville. If you want your tractor fixed, you come to Springdale. And now that story is very real. Springdale is the most diverse community ethnically in the entire state of Arkansas. It's a middle-class income community with a middle income level of workers. All the contractors come from Springdale. All the building supply companies come from Springdale. Springdale is the workforce and the team that is building all of Northwest Arkansas. So that pragmatic community meant that we needed to understand how a new municipal complex would sit in this community and how it would, what was civic in this community. Now there's more. That green line is the Razorback Greenway. That's the pedestrian bicycle path that connects Bentonville with Fayetteville. And of course, Springdale is right in the middle. And an important kind of civic investment in all of Northwest Arkansas. That green line goes right through Springdale and is really our new site, fronts on the Greenway, the Razorback Greenway. Now, Springdale is pragmatic and in a way beautifully simple in terms of their aspirations and their desire for quality, but they have a very special thing. They're a Main Street community. The photograph on the bottom right is on Emma Street. The main street in Springdale is Emma Street. And each year, I think they collect every folding table in the entire city. They line it up down Emma Street. They get every restaurant in the community to come serve dinner. And they all, as a community, break bread together. So the cohesiveness and the sense of community and the sense of belonging and pride that they share is really profound. So the question again, what is civic in this community? Now this project was very complex. It was actually in addition to the original building that Charles's father helped build, I think, I think. So renovation of that building, and Charles might say we took a pretty heavy hand with that renovation. An addition which included a new criminal justice center, new police headquarters, a court, a state district court, and a new city council chamber. So in planning all of that, the design for the logistics was as important as this question about what is civic, because we had to keep all city functions active and serving the community at all times, even though we were moving a 911 call center, and we were moving the central plant that served all the buildings. So the logistics complicated, and then we built it all through COVID, just to add a little stress to our lives. You can see the green entry. The building is fronting on a new green entry from Huntsville Avenue and along the Razorback Greenway, really working itself to Emma now on the up side of the sheet. Now, a civic building in the community of Springdale. Springdale, these are builders. These are, it's a community that knows the value of the dollar, and they were never gonna support an effort to have like a limestone building, representing their idea of civic. Their idea of civic was much more practical. And on top of that, this is a hand-working community. These are craftsmen. They're filled with shops that build things for all over Northwest Arkansas. So we had to find a voice for what was civic and find materials that were within a very limited budget. This entire 122,000 square feet was built for under $300 a square foot. So the cost of construction required a special bond issue election by the community. So not only did we have to be careful with our planning for the budget, but it had to be within a framework that they thought was appropriate and a good investment and a good service to the community. So the search for a civic material on the outside is where the conversation starts. Northwest Arkansas, if you haven't been there, or if you've just seen the magazines and the work, is filled with metal panel buildings, enormously complex and beautiful metal panel buildings. But they tend to be serving commercial interests. They tend to be serving doctor's offices and all kinds of things. The idea that a civic building would have metal panel skin, and now mind you, that was our budget, right? But that's not what Springdale wanted to invest in, and that's not the kind of character and quality and the long-term durability that they were looking for. So finding a voice for a material meant that we had to find an utterly inexpensive material and somehow elevate it, common material, and elevate it to civic presence. And then this building faced west because it was facing the Razorback Greenway, so even the fins that provided the shading for the interior for the, from the western sun became an opportunity to make a connection to the meaningfulness, the connection of Springdale. Those are all hand-built. Those are not store-bought Coignier special louvers. They were built in Springdale by Springdale metalworkers. The material of the skin, after a lot of search and a lot of experiment, we settled on plain concrete. And what we did is we faceted it so that it actually caught light in all different ways. It had deep shadows, it had highlights, and then in the right orientations, it would catch southern reflected light and northern reflected light. So a very inexpensive material that we could manipulate with one piece of formwork pretty easily and make all the panels. And then even on the north facade, we could get warm light and cool shadows. So this kind of an effort to not actually let the material, the concrete, carry this responsibility of civic, but actually the light itself, the flutter of light, the change in the weather. And you hear this repeating in our work. We have found it's so important to fuse light to the surfaces of these buildings and let the light actually bring presence and change and aliveness to the surfaces, even on the brick. So we often use weathered joints to get that deep shadow and that deep highlight in every joint every day. And it adds a kind of subtle texture to the surface that it would not otherwise have with a typical concave joint. Now, I talked about the economy. We still didn't have enough money to build the building. We had done a lot of good work on the skin, but we had to then make a decision about where we spend money in relation to the 122,000 square feet. So we made a distinction between what we called public infrastructure, the front, the street that connects all of the front of the building, the service aspects of the building, with the kind of back of the house work of the institutions, of all the offices. And we realized that made so much sense because the front needed to be durable, permanent, 50, 100 years of durability. The back, the apartments are going to change 10 times in the next 20 years. In fact, they changed 3 times before we finished the project. So chipboard stud walls and carpet became a really good investment for this community, supporting their ability to make changes inexpensively and also being able to afford the entire complex. So everything in orange was a little bit higher elevated in cost and value and durability, and everything in purple was kind of like, that's where we spent the cents in comparison to the dollars. Now, you remember the Shiloh Meeting Hall, that white building in the first slide? Many buildings in Springdale are just beautifully simple proportioned boxes. So we really tried to see the value, the economic value in that, and also the identity. So we tried to isolate these 3 rooms, the ends of these 3 buildings, and really elevate them and connect them to the community. So there are 3 rooms. On the far left is the public meeting room, which is actually doubles as the police training room. In the middle is the court, the state court, and the natural light that comes in through the louvers, and then of course the council chamber closest to you. So 2 things about this. One is each of those rooms was designed for double use. They each have their special official use, but the way in which we work the circulation and security, they can always be used by any residents for any purpose. So they can have weddings, they can have meetings, they can be a quilting seminar in the council chamber, all flexible chairs. So that, again, is another way to connect the civic space with the everyday residents and community. Now, I said the front was elevated in durability and cost. That's not to say it was expensive. Polished concrete, burnished block walls, brick piers, and a little bit of wood at each of the entrances to these special spaces. So still very economical, very practical. Here's the public meeting room. The court, Judge Harper says that this is the best court, and he brags to all his other judges in Northwest Arkansas that this is the best court in Northwest Arkansas, and the council chamber. Now, the other thing about these special rooms is they are then lanterns back to the community. When these decisions are being made, when these deliberations are being made about the community, the council members, the police, they all understand and know that they can be seen. These lights are on at night, and they can also see the community, the spaces that they're responsible for. So just a footnote now to kind of finish up. You remember the murmuration, the kind of flux of birds flowing between the propositions and the foundations that drawing in the first slide. We realize that most of our work and most of our conversations involve lots of these different things over the years. And in fact, any given project has multiple considerations and variables going all the time. This is the Federal Courthouse in Greenville, almost finished, a year and a half, little behind schedule, but almost finished. And whether we talked about origins, engagement, whether listen but lead, art or meaning, and many other aspects of the project, we can talk about it in many different ways. What I want to say about Greenville is it was a port city on the Mississippi that was where cotton and lumber were shipped out across the world. It was before the Civil War, it was one of the most prosperous and most wealthy communities in all of America, all built on the enslaved labor. Later was sharecropping labor. This is a community where not everyone had access to justice. So the typical response of a federal courthouse is often to put the court in the belly of the building, hidden where it is really protected by function, but also it really is a statement of power that the community doesn't necessarily know it's there, and they don't necessarily know where their access to justice lives. So in this project, we pulled the courtrooms out of the building, and they are in a wooden enclosure inside that glass veil. And we say sometimes that this is the important thing about this courthouse is it's important. It is a manifestation of the third branch of government in local communities. But it also fulfills the promise of access to justice, at least the idea that everyone can see where justice is possible. That's the view from the school bus we like to talk about. Now, project's not done, and I just want to give you a couple hints of the same themes running through this project: the fusing of light to the surface, the courtroom, and the inner box, a little bit of a glimpse of what's happening there, and what the courtrooms will look like when they're all finished, natural light coming in.
So as I hope we've described in our foundational projects and now the current work that we've showed you as well, form for us is the transaction between us and things. And if that transaction is to be meaningful, it must engage all of us in the changing phenomena of its place, its light, color, brightness, history, people, and culture. If it is to be meaningful, we believe we have to avoid simplistic concepts to promote, as Roy described, description over explanation and inquiry over instruction. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for that super inspiring talk. It is very clear. So I'm going to start this and then hand it over to you, audience, for questions. And you have to stop me from talking too much because I'm very inspired. So it is very, very clear how important place is to your work and how your work is really responding to place, to environment, the southern light, people, their needs, the politics, etc. And that is just the cream on top of all of the projects in terms of what you deal with. I wanted to start by stepping back and thinking about place and ask you, how did you find your place in Jackson, Mississippi? Whether it is about finding your place as a civic citizen or finding your place in terms of how you developed and designed your practice to suit that place.
So I think we have, is this on? Can you hear me? There we go. So I think we probably have sort of two adjacent stories. We were doing different things at the time. We were always practicing together. I'm from West Tennessee, so when you live in the South, you never think you're going to move further south. That's something that you think you're going to do. But I did. We ended Jackson is where the 5th year program is for Mississippi State University. So I moved to Jackson when I went through the 5th year program. And my first job, I worked for a small firm, WFT Architects in Jackson, who did a lot of historic work. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the first projects that I was given was to do the research for the Historic Structures Report for the renovation and restoration of Edgar Evers' home, which is a tiny ranch house in an amazing little neighborhood that was the first neighborhood developed by Black developers for Black families. And I'm a child that grew up in the 80s, in that time where people like to forget the things that recently happened and were traumatic and sort of let their children be excited about the future. So I realized when I moved to Jackson how little of a civil rights education I had been given growing up as a child. And it was just so inspiring, as I mentioned before, to realize this living civil rights history in Jackson, and then to start to meet the people through the work who were part of that movement and still active in the movement, who then, as I mentioned, became our clients. And so we did work for, we never worked for Mississippi State University. We've done work for almost all the historically Black colleges and universities in Jackson. So it's this weird thing that became an inspiration for us. We're not, we are not at all of color, but these were inspirational things for us. And as Roy mentioned, you have a chance to make a difference in a city the scale of Jackson. We know our congressmen well. We might see them in the grocery store. And so we realized when we started the firm that this is a place we can be inspired by and a place where we think we'll be able to make a difference. Roy, you might have a different addition to that.
Just a footnote, really. I grew up about an hour and a half west of here, in a little town in western New Jersey.
Not south.
Not south, not south. I can tell you that I once went to a store to buy Ann a t-shirt for a gift. And this is, at that point we had children. I lived in Mississippi for 15 years or so, longer. And I was buying a t-shirt, and the woman said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I live here in Jackson." And but I'm from the Northeast, but I've been here long, and children and all that. And so I'm checking out, and she whispers to me, "Well, sure hope you enjoy your visit." So you can never really, carpetbagger sticks, right? But I got recruited to teach at Mississippi State in about 1990, and I found a home, a home that I didn't know that I wasn't in. So, from a small town in western New Jersey to a small town in Mississippi, and adding to what Ann said, also, I had a better civil rights education than she did, in New Jersey. So we found a home and a purpose and a mission all wrapped up in a place. And then slowly the visceral qualities of the place, the complications and the challenges became part of our mission. So we kind of slowly grew into it.
That's very beautiful. Do you know, it reminds me of Glenn Market. As famous and renowned as he was, he didn't ever build outside of Australia. He didn't want to, because he didn't think that he understood the climate and the soil and the light and et cetera, et cetera. But you now are venturing out. So I'm curious about how you see place or understand place outside of Mississippi now.
It's a great question. So Springdale was a real test for us, because it is a different community, different circumstances. What we realized in working in Springdale is we've been in graduate school for a long time in Mississippi, learning how to pay attention to people, to the stories of a place, to cultivate our own knowledge and our own, even if it's secondhand knowledge about what's important to the people that we are working for, and to find a voice for them, for the architecture. So we tend not to impose a solution. We try to discover it in partnership with our clients. So we were trained well in Mississippi, and now we're trying to pay attention to that training and use it using it in other locations.
Well, because as part of, even though we are true Mississippians now, we remain outsiders in a way because of our history and our roots. So we are outsiders in a place that we love, and you know, when you come into a place and work with people to design something they really need, that's a good sort of perspective to have an outsider's perspective, but a hope and love and joy in trying to understand what they need as well.
So you're not insulted when they say, have a good visit? It's clearly a benefit. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Being an outsider?
Yeah, the benefits of seeing something from the outside.
It's maybe the gift that we didn't realize we had all along. First of all, we don't have family and history in Mississippi, so we're not connected to any of the politics or any of the histories of oppression and segregation and racism in the community. So our values are on our sleeves, so to speak. And I think it's the reason we've worked for all the HBCUs, not because we've sought them out, but because we have shared values for the importance of improving, right? The idea that we might be trying to make something better again in the past is absurd, right? We're not good enough yet. Nothing is good enough yet. Our founding fathers saw this as a great experiment, right? It's never been good enough. So we bring that to the table every day as outsiders. We're trying to make a better world. We're trying to do just a little bit more, just a little bit better. And being outsiders, sometimes we can see the problems with perspective that maybe insiders can't.
I think that as I listened to you and as I listen to you now, there's no question here. I'm just kind of observing that your search for a Southern modern small m or Southern contemporary small c language is running throughout all of the projects, this consistent line of inquiry. And of course, one might think of Kenneth Frampton's definition of regional architecture, and it is part of what you are engaged in, thinking through the kind of material resources, etc., that makes sense in that climate, etc. But in my mind, that kind of search in your work is so much more about also the people, whether it is the people and their knowledge of how to build with something, or the introduction of a new technique using their skills, people as in what they need, people as in, you know, the kind of histories and resources that they bring. So I don't have a question around this, but I'm really interested in the question of what is Southern modern or Southern contemporary regional architecture. What is the everyday kind of, you know, process of working this out in practice for you?
That's right. So, and I think the question of if it's critical, it doesn't mean that it's a denial of anything, right? It's a recognition of a history and a question about how things should go forward. So a lot of our earlier work, before budgets became even more restrictive, a lot of our earlier work involved cast in place concrete and masonry construction, and we did all of that work in a sort of educational way, with an educational sort of attitude about the way that we wrote our specifications. and the active way we participated in the construction administration of the projects. So we were looking to have the history of those kinds of materials brought forward while we were able to help teach the craft of building that was not always present in the public buildings and the public contractors that we were dealing with. So that's not, you didn't have a question, I'm not sure what that answer is, but you brought to mind that sort of attitude about how to work with the people who are constructing the projects.
And that's part of it, is actually the investment in the craft itself, and that very compatible with, you know, the critical regionalism that Frampton kind of talks about. But I just saw an article where he actually reflecting back on that essay, and he actually said, and we've actually talked about this, and it's in the Foundations book. We say that we really are followers of Frampton's propositions, but he didn't go far enough in that the tectonics, the materials, the choices you make to build are also in the context of a cultural circumstance, a milieu, that involves, you know, the economy, the perceptions that, you know, some materials are seen as really negative in some cultural situations. And, you know, if you use tin in public buildings in Mississippi, well, there's a whole history of vernacular buildings of people who could barely afford roofs that use tin, right? So now you're confusing the meaning, the local meaning of materials. So I think we have tried to expand his notion of tectonics and critical regionalism to be founded in a place, in a culture, and find its meaning, find its voice. So Southern contemporary architecture for us is a search. Anne is a master at putting buildings together, but never in a real decorative or spectacle way. She is a craftsman of finding quiet solutions that are durable, that are weather-tight, that are beautiful and carefully considered in all of its aspects.
What do you mean by education? When you meant... Sometimes it works. We are vibrating.
Yeah.
When you said, I can't remember how you exactly put it, but you know, when you said when you're developing the details and the specifications and construction sequencing, and you're doing it in an educational way, who are you educating?
So we've kept the firm at a scale where Roy and I and our project architect, our project manager, who is a sort of consistency of every project, are engaged in every phase of the work. And so in the early phases, in the development of the materials and what we're going to use for in the early days, using more masonry and concrete to using the precast concrete that Roy showed at the Springdale building. We've also using that in the courthouse and other facilities. It's a way to specify a thing and then specify the work during construction that teaches the laborers to do it. So the Library Commission building was the first time we had done architectural concrete. And we brought in Shillstone to help us understand how to write that specification. But then we added to that specification these instructive moments during the construction, which everybody does, mock-ups and pre-construction meetings, but we wrote them and we ran them. Roy is a teacher. If I would let him go back to teaching, other than in our studio, he would. But he would lead those pre-construction meetings in a way, and I'll let him talk about that a little more, which is truly educational for the people who are going to build that work. Would you talk about that?
The risk is that you cross over the means and methods boundary that architects are not supposed to cross over. We don't cross over it, but we stretch the hell out of it. And we do that by these pre-construction meetings. And we require who's in attendance. First of all, it's not just the project manager, so we don't just read the spec. We actually have them build the mock-ups, and then we make sure that the laborers and the workers and everybody that's going to be involved in the project are in those meetings. For instance, to achieve architectural concrete, it's all in the vibration of the concrete. So you gotta, you gotta put that vibrator down there longer than the contractors like, because they're worried about blowing out the forms, and then you gotta pull it out slowly, because bubbles come out of concrete only at about 1 inch per second. So you gotta get all the bubbles, all the air bubbles out. And you have to teach them how to do that. So we do it by demonstration. I get up on the forms and I vibrate the concrete. But also, the metalwork, pre-construction, educational pre-construction needs are written all through our spec, and they are like little classes. They are not just reading the spec. They are demonstrations, and we dig in. Now, I can't play a plumb brick wall, but this is the architect's problem, right? We are really good at secondhand knowledge about construction craft, right? And then the interesting, difficult position is being a teacher with secondhand knowledge for somebody that has firsthand knowledge, right? And building a rapport and a relationship in that moment that is meaningful and respectful. And it's balancing those moments that really become, for us, that have been really successful educational moments to increase the craft of quality on our projects.
And another thing with manage the size and the scale of the firm, but because we're in this sort of limited size of an economy, we've been working with subcontractors over and over again for multiple projects. So we are able to watch that teaching have effect, to watch a brick mason's company grow and become the most respected masonry subcontractor in the region. So the area of the market we serve has allowed us to work with these people over and over again and over time and watch it make a difference.
And benefit from them getting better, because they'll come back to us on another project and then they'll say, now we're going to show you what we can do. It's better than anything you said, which is amazing.
Sounds like crossing the line in all the very necessary and meaningful ways. And I need to hand it over to the audience for questions from the audience.
So it sounds like if you're not crossing the means and methods line, you're not doing design build, although at some point I thought you all did design build. But you did mention in your lecture that you do development consulting, and you kind of slightly alluded to the fact that you have a maintenance subsidiary. So could you talk a little bit about those two things and how they affect the kind of overall picture of your practice and why you chose to do them?
Survival. So, we're in a state where there's not enough money to build and often almost no money to maintain buildings. There's often not enough money for projects, or we get programs that are so much bigger than the money available. And in some cases, it's about rescoping the projects and getting them to the right size. But in some cases, we've learned how to, through the development consulting work, as I said before, to find money to help the project be realized. Now, we don't do that for free. So, the part of the reality of having these three entities is also a business plan. So we have a planning and design firm, and we're like everybody else. We have fees, and planning and design is ultimately measured by hours and in the marketplace. And the cash flow for design firm is up and down and unpredictable and affected by the market and affected by the economy. Development is a bigger up and down, but it is a bigger up too. So there's a chance to save some of that money and spread it out over time. And the development consulting work, we don't charge by the hour, we charge a success fee. So if we go after money for a client and we don't get anything, we don't get them any money, we don't get any money. If we secure a couple $1 million for them for the project, then we get a percentage of that money that we bring. They're happy to pay it. We brought $6 million to a data center in Shreveport, and they were happy to pay us a percentage because that just brought down their cost substantially. So the development consulting work functions as its own entity, but it helps us build a more robust, stable company. The facilities management is a separate story, but it feeds the business plan. But we had done a high school in Newton, Mississippi, and the young superintendent was calling in and saying, can you come over here and help me interview janitors? And what do I do with this indoor air quality unit? Can I just turn it off in the summer? It's expensive. And Ann was running back and forth. We were both kind of helping her think through the reality of maintaining buildings. And Ann said one day, you know, this is work that architects could do. We develop all these specifications. We make sure the owner's operating manuals are correct. We know so much about the operation of the buildings. Why are architects only putting their effort into a very short period of time of design? If we're out in front of the planning process, helping communities plan for good buildings, why aren't we at the other end taking care of buildings? And beneficially, the cash flow for a facilities management business is like that every month. So these three businesses serve our community, serve the resilience of our firm, and turn out to be a good business plan.
And not only that, but an education for us. So when we took care of the Library Commission building for eight years after it was built, and we're able to just learn so much about the decisions that we had made as designers that became problems and concerns for the people who took care of the building or who had to take care of the building. So it gives us an education and reminds us, I mean, we as designers, you have this short window of time where you're deciding all of these things. It's easy to forget how huge the time frame of the building before and into its use and then after its renovation. So it really teaches us that and keeps that in the forefront of our minds as designers.
We've really come to understand that as leverage. You know, in our short period of time, how can we leverage the intelligence and the planning into a really long-term life for the building that serves many people over, 50 years or 100 years? So, and then also helps our clients be stronger. Good question, Rosalie.
I think we are at time. I think we have to have the conversation about both and over dinner because there's so many versions of both and that I have heard you talk about. The ability to kind of think through all of this efficiency, generosity, publics, not public, super inspiring. I feel like I need to get to work. Thank you so much for an inspiring talk and educating us about the South. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.